There are a lot of obscure and lesser known things out there in the world of vanilla World of Warcraft, things which separate it from other versions of the game, make it memorable, and above all, unique. Vanilla was full of these small RPG aspects which in some cases were planned for the game but never panned out, or just things that one developer one day thought, hey, this will be cool, I'm just gonna go put that in the game. And today I wanted to go over some of them, so hopefully you'll find something new, maybe it'll be a trip down memory lane. And if you want to see more of this type of content, definitely let me know, because vanilla is not short on secrets. With that said, let's make a start. At night, certain locations in the game have their NPCs change between different forms. The first one, which you'll have probably seen, especially if you were playing Season of Discovery during Phase 1, is in Pyrewood Village, a small Alliance-friendly town towards the south of Silverpine Forest, just near the Greymane Wall, aka the entrance to Gilneas. It's an elite zone and the Horde have a few quests to go and complete there, but when night hits, the townsfolk transform from humans into bloodthirsty Worgen, making them aggro onto both factions. This can be a bit of a shock when you zone out of SFK to go and vendor there, and the vendors are just straight up gone. But this makes a lot of sense for a whole village to turn at night, especially so close to where the Worgen were born. There is also another place this happens, and this one is kind of random to be honest, and that's the graveyard just next to the entrance for the dead mines. Okay, well it's not actually a functional graveyard, it sends you back to Sentinel Hill, but it sure looks like one. During the day there are vultures there, and at night, for some reason instead there are ghouls. I guess some Blizzard developer thought that this would be a cool change to have, and so they just made it happen. I believe these two places are the only areas where Blizzard used this mechanic of different mobs between day and night, but I think it's a fun idea and would have made sense in other places too. There is also one item in the game which is only available during certain seasons of the year in real world time, and that is, if you've enjoyed fishing you'll know, the winter squid. Available approximately from the 22nd of September to the 20th of March the following year, or about 180 days in real time, this fishing catch is used in an endgame food that boosts agility, and when the fishing season is off, people can really reap the rewards of making sure they've stocked up in the downtime before next season. It's a bit crazy there's actually a usable endgame item that's only possible to get half of the year, but hey, that's vanilla World of Warcraft for you. And people always go out of their way to catch loads because it can be easy money in the long term. In future expansions, Blizzard would make certain content only available during certain types of weather. This is particularly true for battle pets, such as the Baby 8 from Jaguaro Isle just off the coast of Stranglethorn Vale, who only appears when it's raining, or the Silphid hatchling during sandstorms, or the Arctic Fox Kit during snowstorms, and so on. This is a pretty interesting idea, and there is weather in vanilla World of Warcraft too. I wonder if someday this kind of mechanic could be incorporated into the game in some way. Next up, have you ever noticed how when you level up in Classic, you get +5 skill to your class's specialization? As in you're a mage, you'll get +5 skill to Frostfire and Arcane. Have you ever really wondered, why am I getting this? What's this all about? Well, it's a relic of the very old talent and leveling system from earlier versions of World of Warcraft that was scrapped pre-launch. It used to be the case that casting abilities and spell schools would give you skill points similar to how weapon skill works, which could then be used to upgrade certain abilities or stats which your character had. This was much more similar to older RPGs where you could start a character and then build them into pretty much anything that you had the vision for. But Blizzard was already taking a more class-based approach though, where each one of them would be innately different. So ultimately this was taken over by the talent system instead, and skill points were left in for things such as professions, weapon skills and so on, but they were just a metric to improve those stats by, not points you would actually spend. But they did leave your class skills improving in the game as a bit of flavor text to show that your character is growing and improving, and I used to think that this was all there was to say about this stat, but for one class and specialization, their class skill is actually relevant, and improving it does something, and that is of course for feral druids. So in Season of Discovery, Blizzard have put items in the game which increase the power of the feral combat class skill, which is equivalent to giving feral extra weapon skill, as can be seen here on some re-itemized Molten Core loot. I believe this is the first time ever a class skill has been able to be leveled beyond cap, and maybe there's more room for class improvement through this seemingly flavor only stat than we thought. Now, throughout vanilla World of Warcraft, if you're a hunter, there is absolutely no doubt you've heard of Broken Tooth. This was a highly valued pet, especially in PvP, and was reputed for his 1.0 attack speed. This was the fastest attack speed of any pet at the time, and will cause spell knockback to occur on every single attack. Equally, if you were Beast Mastery spec'd, it was very good for frenzy uptime, as your pet was attacking so often, it would be keeping those stacks rolling. However, there used to be a way more powerful pet in the game, and if you're Alliance, you've probably run past him several times in Duskwood, and he's called Lupos. Before 1.9, that'll be AQ, so quite late in vanilla, this pet used to do entirely shadow damage with their basic attack. Of course, shadow damage would ignore any armor, making this the highest DPS pet in the game by an absolute mile, and he would shred through armored targets in PvP and PvE like nothing. It was a very unique pet and the only one that worked this way, but probably too overpowered to be kept in this state, so Blizzard did end up nerfing him to do physical attacks instead of just shadow, and we never saw the shadow damage variation in Classic as we released on the final patch. Now, I have a few hidden locations in the game which you may or may not have come across. The first one is in the hinterlands, and if you're on the Alliance side, you'll have ran past Shindigger's camp before if you've done the quest line. For Horde, this is a bit more out of the way, but if you're running up the hill on the way to the camp from the west to the east, if you make a left turn just before you actually get to the camp, you'll see a pass over the mountains into Western Plaguelands. If you start to run up here, it reveals the zone as Plague Mist Ravine, which also makes it pretty obvious on the map when you do so, and it will take you from this place in Hinterlands straight to the outside of Scholomance. This shortcut is not far off the beaten trail, but it's just so easy to miss that I bet a lot of people don't even know it's there. Saying that, I'm not really sure it is a shortcut to anything. It tends to be if you want to go to Scholomance, there's shorter ways to get there, and how many times do you really need to go from Western Plaguelands to the Hinterlands? Probably not that often, but hey, maybe this comes in somewhere for someone. There is another super obscure location in the game called Zalashi's Den. Again, you'll have run past this place so many times and you'll have no idea it's ever been there. It's a cave just hidden out of sight on the eastern coast of Tanaris, and it's home to a single Naga, named after the Den himself, Zalashi, who is just kind of there. What purpose is he for? Well, we never really found out. I guess somebody had intentions to use him for some content or a quest maybe, but nothing ever came to light on what his purpose was. I even found a thread from 2010 of people trying to figure out what his purpose was. Apparently they were being a bit led on by a GM as well, classic, but when the Cataclysm came around, he mysteriously disappeared. It's often the case in future expansions that Blizzard reused vanilla NPCs in one way or another, but Zalashi, who's never really served a purpose, disappeared one day and nothing has ever been heard from him since. Maybe we'll see him in a future expansion one day, but he's out there somewhere watching, waiting, and biding his time. Next is one which, if you've completed Naxxramas in vanilla and received the phylactery of Kel'Thuzad, you will have done, but I'm not sure if you'll have seen the quest all the way through. See, the start of the quest and the end of it are several expansions apart. So after you kill KT and you get the phylactery, it starts a quest which says, your better judgment dictates that you destroy the phylactery, preventing the Lich from ever reforming. Thankfully, you seldom listen to that internal voice of reason. Someone at Light's Hope will pay you hugely for this artifact. Who cares if Kel'Thuzad regenerates to full power? And so you hop along to Light's Hope Chapel to see if there's any takers for this undead soul of a powerful Lich, and unsurprisingly, there is. And it's none other than the guy that you trade for your priest tier 3, Father Inigo Montoy, who when you hand it over to him appears to be salivating and says you'll be greatly rewarded, give it here now. I mean, you do get a nice trinket to be fair, but our character isn't exactly the brightest here. And as we find out in Wrath of the Lich King, he returns it to Arthas, which enables Naxxramas to be reformed and Kel'Thuzad reborn once again. And as a reward for this, the Father is transformed into a powerful Lich himself. I mean, that's the lore reason Naxxramas was brought back. It totally wasn't Blizzard just bringing it back as a freebie because basically no one did it in vanilla. Anyways, we end up meeting Father Montoy in a quest once again in Dragonblight, where we see the Liches become Thalzan the Duskbringer, and things are looking kind of shaky in our battle against him, but then along comes Tyrion Fordring to save the day. We beat him, and that is that. It's a bit of a long ending to a quest which starts in vanilla, but it is interesting. I guess even back then they knew they already wanted to bring back Kel'Thuzad in one way or another. Next up are some unused instance portals, which you've almost certainly seen around the world. Blizzard planned so many big things when they were first doing vanilla, and they just didn't have time to finish all of them all the way through. But just having those green swirly instance portals behind a set of bars really got the imagination going. And they also left something in the game which maybe Blizzard did get around to using eventually. There's of course the Storming portal, which was supposedly going to be used for player housing, a feature which was experimented with during the early versions of World of Warcraft, but ultimately never made it to live. In Dark Whisper Gorge, of course, there's the portal to Mount Hyjal, and a decent amount of work was also done on the mountain too in terms of zone building, environment, and so on. This was a big lore-driven place in the game, so whenever Blizzard ended up getting to use it, it had to kind of be a big deal, but again, it wasn't a zone we saw in vanilla, and the first look we'd have at Hyjal would be in a raid where we travel back in time during the Burning Crusade. And of course, the portal at the end of Strat Undead, the one near where all the undead skeletons run out when you're fighting your way to Baron Rivendell. This was going to be the portal to Naxxramas, but again didn't make it to live, and instead you had to pay your way to get teleported up into Nax. Oh, and a bonus thing here, when you zoned into Nax in vanilla, it was a one-way trip. There was no way to leave. There being an instance portal inside a dungeon very much followed how they did Molten Core and Blackwing Lair initially, where similarly those two have a raid portal inside of Blackrock Depths and Upper Blackrock Spire, but I guess by the time they got around to Naxxramas, they decided, well, we've done achievements anyway so people don't have to go running through a dungeon, let's just not bother this time. Speaking of dungeons though, despite it being super common for everyone to always take 5 players to a dungeon, the majority of the dungeon content in Classic can take more players than that if you really want to. In fact, as of patch 1.12, the final patch of vanilla, there are only 3 dungeons in the game where you can strictly not bring more than 5 players at one time. Those being Blackrock Depths, Strat Undead and Living, okay maybe those count as 2, and Scholomance. Every single other dungeon in the game could take 10 players. You could do a 10-player Gnomeregan, Deadmines, Zul'Farrak, pretty much anything you wanted, but people never bothered doing this, and to be honest it's not hard to see why. Being over 5 affects the experience you receive greatly, you have way more people to roll against for loot, and perhaps biggest of all the quests in dungeons are not possible to complete in a raid group, so really you could bring more than 5, but why ever would you? The exception to this is of course Upper Blackrock Spire, which is the only dungeon where bringing 10 players is seen as the norm, and there are several reasons why it works here. People tend to be close to or at level cap, so XP isn't quite as highly valued, quests are tagged as raid wide so they can be completed, and well it's just kind of difficult compared to a lot of other dungeon content. There's a bunch of dangerous mobs and large trash packs, and if you were going in there with 1 tank and 1 healer, it would be kind of challenging to be honest. And whilst you'd all get more loot as 5, people just started doing it as 10, and that's still the normal way to do it all these years later. And finally, despite the name World of Warcraft, PvP was pretty thin at launch to be honest, and initially at least it was very much up to players to make their own content within the game. And if you didn't play on launch, you may not remember just how little there really was. There was certainly no arenas, we didn't get those till TBC, there were no battlegrounds at launch, we'd get Warsong Gulch and Alterac Valley sometime shortly after, and then Arathi Basin sometime after that. There was no honor and ranking system, there was no PvP gear, there wasn't even a way to queue for Battlegrounds cross-server until the final patch of vanilla. If you wanted to do a Battleground back in the day, you had to go over to your Battleground master, queue it up, and you'd have to hope there'd be enough people also queuing on your server for it to start. It definitely built up rivalries, and PvP was more active back then, especially in the Battleground scene I'd have to say. But the World of Warcraft, when it first released from a PvP standpoint, was I see a red bar on my screen, I'm gonna go get them. And hey, you know what they say all these years later? Red is dead. And sometimes those player player-driven rivalries and stories you can make by yourself are more than enough without all the extra content. But anyways, those are just a few obscure or strange bits of information about vanilla World of Warcraft. Despite the game at times showing its age, it certainly was unique in the way that it approached many different aspects of the MMO, and there's a reason we're all still coming back to it all these years later. It's always interesting to try and find that bit of information that I've never heard of before, so if you found something new, let me know, and if you want to see more videos of this type, definitely let me know as well. But as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.